Hello, gentlemen and ladies, the 2% of girls who watch me, according to YouTube statistics. Today we have the top 5 concepts in MTT, and at the end, as a bonus, I will talk about the most important, in my opinion, game-related wisdom. As zero, I added here a good understanding of vocabulary and generally some basic poker concepts, that is basic combinatorics, basic mathematics, some formulas for fathers on the minimum defense range of MDF, the principle of implementing the implied equity of fathers or expected fathers.
The pot of fathers, equity, SPR.
The ratio accordingly of the pot to the stack, the concept of linear polar capped ranges, indifference, that is the threshold values of various situations. All this needs to be well understood. Now, in the game, you won't particularly need this constantly, but in order to understand my content and in order for your poker intelligence, so to speak, to improve overall, you need to understand all these concepts well and practice these examples, because that's when understanding emerges. Okay, I won't dwell on this here. Most of my viewers are very well versed in all of this. If there is a real need, write in the comments. Maybe I'll record a video on the basics. So there is the first real concept. And what is very important to understand is that preflop in MTT is king. That is, it is the most important, the main part of the win rate is made precisely on the preflop and in money-making situations, so to speak. The main thing is the preflop. Moreover, in the ICM stage and in knockout tournaments, these effects are only intensified. Now, there are even those 10 big blinds there on Poker OK. I looked at the tournaments, but where there is practically no talk of post-flop at all. So pre-flop is what should first reach a very solid state. As for push fold, you should work on push fold spots throughout your entire career, and during the first, well, I don't know, the first 5 years. It won't be a mistake to do a warm-up before each session, specifically push fold of some spots, because there is an infinite amount of pre-flop, especially in the current narratives when a large amount of play happens in knockouts with many variables. Plus, there is an opportunity to use tools like GTO Wizard to study spots from different stages with bubble factor and so on. In general, this is work that should be ongoing. The next thing related to this, pay the most attention to the most frequent role-defining spots. That is, first of all, the depth of 13 to 35 blinds, well, up to 35 blinds, because the majority of the game will take place at this depth. And accordingly, first of all, these are open raises, understanding the basics well and knowing in which situations you can expand your range. For this, it is good to master some tools where you can learn ranges, but in my videos I will only recommend 2 software programs at the moment, GTO Wizard and Hold'em Resource Calculator. These 2 programs, platforms, practically fully cover all needs MTT players today. The next most frequent is the defense of the big blind, but also partly the small blind. Again, there is a lot in the PSKO narratives. And playing against open raises from position. This is the main thing, sort of conditionally. They're 4-bet pots. This is on for dessert, so to speak. I talked about this in more detail in my video about the MTT spots map and top MTT secrets, pre-flop mechanics. I recommend it because it's essentially on the same topic, but in more detail. So let's move on. Point 2. The second most important principle is that no matter what anyone says, GTO and what online libraries currently offer, you can calculate for yourself. This is the foundation in any case. We have nothing better. No matter how GTO is criticized, it is what we need to work with, and everything else is misleading. We don't need to try to memorize GTO ever. We don't need to play exactly as recommended by various preflop libraries in particular. But we need to, based on these strategies, clearly realize and understand our own, and accordingly, during training, first create it and then constantly refine it. So accordingly, as a basis for learning preflop, I would recommend again the GTO solution, specifically GTO Wizard, because they are simply the best. There are the most of them. Preflop Academy is also in principle a large unique library, which I could also recommend. It also includes different bubble factors. Both can be used for free with a little bit of effort. Preflop, in my opinion, GTO Wizard is available online for free. If anything, the link to Skidov will be in the first comment, well, for the first purchase. And in general, based on these strategies, I would always recommend creating your own charts.
That is, just take Ecolab
And draw for yourself. That is at least initially for 3 depths, for short stacks, for medium stacks, and then for deep stacks. But again, the most important thing is to have a good understanding for medium and short stacks. Equilab is also free software. You can download it on the Poker Strategy website. Or there is some other equivalent somewhere. Now there are tons of chart programs online. In general, working with charts is very useful because it will immediately embed these charts made by you for yourself on a subconscious level. That's it. It is important to develop an intuitive understanding of range boundaries, the so-called indifference points. That is to understand what you see in online solutions and how your range might potentially change if opponents after you are tighter or looser. Well, as a hint, I can say that in most situations they will be looser and will not, for example, call as much from positions as often as on the button cutoff, especially maybe in Jetty Wizard, but the better opponents play closer ranges here. Therefore, it is necessary to develop understanding here. And this involves work discussing these spots with colleagues who play at a level close to yours or slightly higher with similar limits. Only this way. There's no need to memorize anything here. It's all about understanding and developing your poker intelligence, experience, and game intuition, but based naturally, precisely on experience and not on the fact that a second randomizer was used, which of course is also great, right? Thirdly, we develop lineup-oriented thinking. That is, no situations in MTT exist in a vacuum, unlike cash games. And this is very important. This is a fundamental difference between MTT and cash games. Here, no situation is ever detached from the specific tournament context. That is, we always have a certain background of what's happening. This background is the stage of the tournament, the beginning, the middle, whether late registration has already ended, how many people are left until the bubble, right? Until the money. How close is your stack, and all else being equal, is it already enough to make it into the money? Should you focus on this if it's some kind of, or this accordingly is a small field when there are few people in tournaments overall. There, the factor of jumps is often significant. In general, you need to keep track of all this. It's always a background that you can't forget. And we understand that in principle, there are no cheap EV situations in MTT. Until the end of late registration, we won't miss out on much if we treat these situations as cheap EV. But at the same time, it is important to understand that the bubble factor appears immediately. And in the same Jetty Wizard, for example, there are 100% trees. You can compare them, for example, with chip EV, and they will be very similar, but with their nuances. And regarding tournament life in general, right? keep in mind that you have already paid the tournament fee, you have already received your stack in exchange for your money, and you have already paid the rake. And accordingly, to make a re-entry, it's not just like re-entering in cash games. You will be paying again for the rake, for the opportunity to participate in the tournament.
Rake back is very important here. That is what portion of it you will get back.
Here, both the room's conditions matter, and whether you are playing backed by someone from a poker school and if you receive the full rake back. Because this is a super significant part of your profit over the long run. Then again, is this tournament a PKO or a freeze out? This is a very big difference. Currently, PKO tournaments dominate, but at the high level, the most prestigious tournaments are still freeze outs. And therefore, on one hand, you need to study both. Moreover, well, let's say offline poker, offline MTTs are primarily freeze outs. A romantic MTT player should not refuse this, but during the learning process of low to mid stakes, I would rather recommend specializing in something as narrow as possible, knowing your field well, the time when you play, and the opportunities for this time zone in terms of loading. That is, which tournaments are happening, in which rooms, how you can set up a schedule, how much money to load, what kind of tournaments these will be. You need to understand these things very well. And accordingly, in PKO, there are significantly more of these lineup-oriented mechanics and their heuristics and so on. You need to be well versed in them. This, well, is quite difficult to do quickly. And in general, at the initial stage, I would simply recommend choosing knockouts for everyone. Honestly, that's a straightforward, simple piece of advice because they have higher results, better lineups, better results on average. And later on, add there all sorts of tournaments, so to speak. That is, in any case, to this. What factors should be considered here? Lineup coverage is very important. That is, you will have two completely different ranges if you are the deepest stack in the lineup and the shortest. Because in fact, if you have the shortest stack at the table in a knockout, especially in some early middle stage, then the situation for you in terms of your expected value and, well, expectation value, right? That is, the expectation from playing at this table is very poor because in fact you are not competing for one of the parts of the prize pool, right? Because the entire prize pool in knockouts is divided into two parts. One part is the bounty and one part goes into the prize pool. If you don't cover anyone at the table, then you're simply not competing for the first part of the prize pool. That's it. If accordingly you don't cover the lineup, it often makes sense to consider whether a limp range is needed. Because, for example, for a relatively short stack on a covering lineup, it could be the entire range. But these are quite complex advanced concepts and we won't dwell on them deeply. The essence of lineup-oriented thinking, I think you'll understand from these examples. Potential ICM with a change in stack size. That is, for example, what will doubling give you? You were sitting, for instance, short, covering no one. And there might be a situation where doubling up will make you cover the entire lineup, right? And it might be that you even double up and nothing changes for you. These are two very different situations. This is precisely the layer of spots that are still not calculated by software. That is, the software does not evaluate them yet, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't at least consider them in the background, so to speak. When evaluating the lineup after you, it is most important to assess the players on the button and blinds, especially on the blinds and particularly on the big blind, as the hand will most often be against them. Accordingly, if there is an opponent there who is comfortable for you, or if there are amateurs and so on, you can allow yourself a slightly wider range. If there is, on the contrary, a super unyielding opponent with a frequent raise and so on, then you can open close to solver ranges or even a bit tighter. There's nothing terrible about that. I'll mix in a few examples on. For example, the influence of a short stack on the big blind. So we see here that the big blind has a stack of 3 blinds, and accordingly how our UTG range will change. Both situations are 25% of the field left, but here accordingly the lineup is all deep except for the hijack. On the big blind the stack is large, well here too a short stack there. And as we can see in the left situation, the range is 3% wider. Notice in which direction. This is a pure equity expansion because no playability is important to us naturally in such a situation, right? And accordingly, well, let me introduce these hands like this. And accordingly, in such spots, maximum equity expansions. So even ace-2, ace-3, strangely enough, are out. Overall here on the left screen, the range is wider, but ace-2, ace-3 are not there, simply because they rank, well, worse than, say, ace-7.
In suited. In deeper stacks, ace-7 will be considered well against the big blind conditionally as trash.
But here the playability factor against the player, against whom we most often have a hand, is of course the big blind. It will not be important. And besides, the player on the big blind, being so short, cuts the expected value of cold calls in position because, well, it creates leverage, right? That is, there will be a call, he pushes, and there will be a word from UTG. He can knock out. Next example, short on BB in late, top 10% of the field. This is already a knockout situation. On the left table, we also have a super short stack on the small blind, right? 3 blinds. And accordingly, there is motivation to knock him out. Although here it's just a starting knockout. It's important to understand that in the top 10, a starting knockout, in the top 10% of the field, it doesn't really cost that much, right? And on the right, we have a situation where on the big blinds, there's a stack that we cover, but it's not that short. And on the left, we open by 8%, as much as 8% more. 8% for UTG is really a lot. Here, of course, the trees are not completely symmetrical, but there's no need to nitpick about that. The mechanics will be followed exactly like this. This is also to say that here, if UTG did not cover the big blind, then his stack would be even tighter. And in principle, we could see a picture with an even greater difference. I didn't try to specifically pick the most extreme examples. In principle, it's noticeable as it is. Next. I won't dwell on this at all, but I should mention the possible advisability of limp strategies in short lineups. I had a video about limps, but YouTube complained about it. I deleted it to avoid any trouble.
Maybe I'll record a new video about limps someday.
Right, but the main benefits potential limps might have are drawing opponents into your scenarios where you are better oriented. Well, in fact, it's creating a magical situation, yes, in which you will already feel significantly better than your opponents when you have understanding, experience, position, and so on. And your range is not capped and so forth. And the second factor that influences this is that short stacks are weakly elastic. That is, he will do roughly the same thing whether you raise or limp. So why pay more? For example, situation for 14 big blinds and the button. Yes. So now which hands go into a limp here is clear. That is those that will have decent playability in a 3-way pot. Well, in general, what's the difference? You can look at the ranges yourself. The limp strategy allows us to play about 6% wider, but in absolute terms, at least according to Digital Wizard estimates, the difference will be quite insignificant. Here it's 0.43. Here it doesn't yet, here it shows here it's 0.44 with limps, so just by 0.1. But again, if
opponents continue to play balanced. If you're in a limp situation, will realize an additional edge because opponents will play suboptimally, then naturally the values would be others. And against the race, on average, people play more correctly. But at the same time, I will not encourage you, so to speak, to these strategies, because they require a good understanding of the game in general, and in particular post-flop play, playing against capped ranges, and so on. And conceptually, in knockouts, strategies without limping lose significantly. Yes, that is in knockouts. Well, at least consider where these spots are good and gradually start implementing them into your game. Well, definitely, from my point of view. In foldouts, it's not critical. That is, you can go through all the limits up to the highest and become one of the strongest in high stakes MTT, and playing without using limps at all, and there won't be a problem with that. That is, many top players don't use them and feel great. So here too, it's up to your preference. Poker is still a game that can be played in different ways and still win. So, and the last probably example, yes, the last example is the influence of a short stack behind on the 3-bet range. What situation do we have here? Let me get my bearings. At the right table, we have no shorts behind us. And at the left table, the button has a stack of 9 blinds, right? And we see the same spot top, well, 50% field left. And VG is somewhat different, but here it is not critical either. I just noticed, and that the sizing is different. A slightly better example could have been chosen, but again, it doesn't change the essence. The presence of a short stack behind always narrows the overall playable range, because speculative hands lose a lot in expected value. So conditionally, the cutoff has some hands that call here, like 9-10 or 9-8. If these were deeper stacks, something else would be suitable for the war. Then some more speculative connectors would be called with pleasure, like these, and so on. But having a short stack behind you ultimately narrows the calling range specifically for speculative hands, because, well, you understand it's easy for a situation to occur where you call with 7-8, 8-9, and so on. This unfortunate stack of 9 blinds will push against you, and you'll have to call with the connector. In fact, you'll create a situation where your next action will be, you'll be obliged to call, but it will be negative. Do you understand the point? And connectors in such situations, of course, ultimately lose to aces, because aces block that very push range of the short stack, because, well, conditionally he pushes all this part. And imagine these are offsuit combinations, so there are so many of them. If he blocks a quarter of them, it is very significant in terms of blockers. That is, you also need to remember that an ace is the strongest pre-flop blocker, especially in situations with short stacks and so on, because usually nothing stops them from shoving with ace-jack and higher, and sometimes even wider. Therefore, if there was a race before us and there are short stacks after us, then in principle connectors often and most often become nearly unplayable hands up to the blinds. These are just examples to show you that this is such lineup-oriented thinking, and that, unlike cash, another type of thinking on the free flop cannot exist. Don't confuse yourselves. We always think within the framework of the lineup. We always play a unique situation. Therefore, MTT is much more of an art, so to speak, than a technology, and than cash in particular. This is wonderful because it will help our discipline to last longer, and prevent us, let's say, from being quickly replaced by bots, as is happening in cash games. So the fourth concept is the importance of position and initiative for realizing equity. This point directly follows from the previous one, being its continuation regarding lineup-oriented thinking and so on.
But there is an important, not obvious to everyone point, especially for beginners, which is that aggressive strategies through playing the leading role and so on with initiative are much easier to implement, and all real experiences prove this. That is, those who try to play defensive strategy in heads-up matches and battles, for example, experience very big problems. In this regard, there was a very interesting interview with Malinovsky and Stefan after the heads-up match. They played a decent distance, about 50,000 hands, if not more. And so Stefan is a super aggressive player, and much of Malinovsky's plan was to catch him on this aggression, playing defensive strategies well. But later he came to the conclusion that to respond to a very aggressive strategy, one should conditionally react with even more aggression, over-aggression to over-aggression, because retreating into defense and correctly defending there is very difficult. This task, which well, is kind of easily performed by a machine, but on the level of our intuitive understanding, it's much more difficult because we don't feel the equity of hands as finely and don't understand the math behind it all as well. You see, playing a bad push is very simple, and on a number of situations with an advantage in range, strength, and well, the nuts, it will be quite a correct strategy. And in general, this is how people quickly learn to just push buttons or so-called mindless three barrels in understandable situations in some realistic spots because of how they encounter strong opponents who know how to counter it. In principle, it can work quite well, because defending against a three barrel or on the big blind with a medium hand is a much more complex task than just betting bad. And it turns out that conditionally you have a spot that is on one hand symmetrical, but on the other hand the skill required to implement a strategy on the big blind is always much greater than for pre-flop raising. Well, within such strategies, if we are to discuss, well, consequently, without position is absolutely not critical to play slightly tighter at the first level, that is pre-flop, and to slightly overfold on the big blind, especially against strong and aggressive players, when you don't understand exactly how you will have an edge in this situation. Moreover, often the tournament situation, like the bubble factor and so on, will also influence your range to narrow. This will also make your range stronger on the post flop, and you will be able to play it tightly and decisively on the post flop. That is also important, and a crucial transition. That is up to the river. We always play very tightly. On the river, you often need to make a strong assumption. Is your opponent more likely to overbluff or not double bluff? Because in real life, if a person does not double bluff, then often all blind catches may already be played poorly. And then the factor of some blockers, something else, what the call should be according to GTO, that doesn't even take second place, but rather third or fourth. You need to look at the specific situation, because we are always playing a real spot, a real unique spot that will never be repeated. It's not like in cash games. Here you can't say, oh yes, it's always a call. No, that's what soulless cash game players might say. We always need to think. So consequently, being a pre-flop raiser, in some cases, you can actually expand your range relative to solver values. This is because the opponents behind us will often be them tighter, and because they won't be able to correctly play defensive strategies. So keep that in mind. The next sub-point related to the importance of position and initiative could essentially be highlighted as a separate point. It's that 3-bet oriented strategies in real life will generally lead to better expected value, especially in effective stacks deeper than 35 to 40 blinds, when the opponent cannot blatantly open 4-bet you widely. There are suited connectors, pocket pairs, or some other speculative hands. And you, even understanding that you are being super widely 4-bet pushed, will be forced to fold some strong linear hands. Well, so you 3-bet with king queen offsuit, and you know that the situation is such that they shove any pocket pair, any suited ace. So even with this knowledge, in stacks of 30 blinds, playing a 3-bet call with king queen won't be profitable, but it would be quite close, quite marginal. That is, you corner yourself into a point close to indifference. So when it's frustrating to fold, but calling isn't profitable, if you create such a situation for yourself, it's very bad. If you catch your opponent in this, then on the contrary, you're doing great. In this conditionally, in many ways, the meaning and range in MTT is achieved in such things. At the early stages of learning, it's better to have a narrow range of calls in open positions, and it can be quite transparent. There is nothing problematic in this, leaning towards 3-betting with hands that are borderline, and accordingly gradually expanding it closer to the cutoff and having a fairly wide one on the button, especially in good lineups and against convenient opponents. Now I will show what I mean with an example. This is a chip situation on the right. Yes, here we have a fairly wide call range, even under the gun against under the gun. For example, I would never recommend calling with ace-jack in such a situation. Let's use this pencil, neither ace-jack nor king-queen. I want to use some light color like purple, lilac. Let's go with lilac. Ace-queen offsuit. In most spots, I would also recommend 3-betting like ace-king. And cold call. The hands that often lean towards cold calling can be very narrow. These are hands with nut potential, that is ace-queen, ace-10, suited. When we don't really get a lot of value directly from a 3-bet, yet we are never against a multi-pot with these hands. In a number of situations, we are not particularly against the squeeze and can also play correctly. King-queen can also be included there. In some situations, tens can be not 3-bet, especially if there are short stacks, nines. Well, obviously lower pocket pairs. No, here it already depends on the depth. Well, and the best connectors, like for example, Jack-10 or 9-10 in deep stacks, if you also cover them with all-in, it's a knockout. Well, that might be interesting too, but it's not a fact that they will show better expected value than after a 3-bet. Of course, all the knockout logic changes a lot of things. These are lineups and pre-flop range construction in knockout tournaments, depending on the lineup. It's a huge topic, not even for a poker video. It's for an hour, even two. It's for a serious course. That's why, well, again, come to SW school, to our MTT school, where we will teach all this thoroughly, explain and so on. But again, I have explained the general principles to you. And by the way, 50 left, here the range looks much more adequate, you see, in terms of approaching the one I conditionally recommend playing in position. That is the call is these hands, pocket pairs, and everything else is in the 3-bet. So here is an example on progressive knockout. the lineups, how important the coverage factors are, and the one who opens directly and behind the back. In the first situation, the button on the left covers both the under the gun and the big blind. So this is an ideal situation for him. As you can see, 19% call, 8% 3-bet and cold call with hands that, well, real people don't play like that. Well, as an exception, let's say, you can sometimes see this from the most loose, playful types and so on. But even at high stakes, it's not common, let's say, to have such wide ranges in similar situations. And I would also advise not to chase this, because in such depth, well, around 50 blinds, for example, with a pre-flop raiser, the real scenario where you can get to the point with these hands that you can make a knock, well, this is will not happen as often, in my view, as the solver conditionally assumes in its predictions. And if you dig under the hood, what trees are and where in these calculations, then the solver, if needed, believe me, it will reveal the stack distribution. Where needed, he will place the necessary overbet. Where needed, he will go all in on the river, 3 barrels, and so on. So here's the situation on the big blind where there are also deep stacks. Well, the order of numbers is similar, but the button does not cover either the big blind or the under the gun. I would say the situation is very similar, 50% left. The effective depth is similar, right? Well, it doesn't differ critically, but in fact, the range here is significantly narrower, and 5% less is a lot, considering it's already wide here. So sometimes we get in with 5-3 suited, and sometimes with 7-5, even always with 8-6, 7-10, and king 5. It just expands here by another 5%. Here, this also needs to be understood, but again, recommend to all of you, especially players at low and mid stakes who don't have a lot of experience yet, not to chase after repeating similar strategies. This will most often not lead to the results you want. And this thoughtless cupping of wide ranges, well, in short, will often waste a lot of your attention, lead to some serious mistakes and disrupt your mindsets, and it positively affects the EV. Well, that's not a fact at all. In short stacks, focus on the question mark solution regarding these PSKO setups. It makes much more sense. Because, well, bringing it to the stack obviously is significantly easier at a shallow depth. For example, look, in this situation, here UTG covers the blinds, but does not cover the button. The button covers everyone, 12% call, 7-3 bet, well, 20 VP overall. And here's the spot, BBO button, well, slightly smaller stack, but doesn't cover anyone. Although, damn, even actually covers the SB. But nevertheless, look at how tight his range is. That's 25% left there and there. And, well, it actually decreases by 10%, decreases the PIP. This is what I'm talking about and what I understand as lineup-oriented thinking. And it is within this paradigm that you need to think constantly. That is, this is where your assessment of the real situation at the table begins. So ICM and the importance of tournament life. Win rate and ROI are related over a large sample and are quite linearly related, simply because this usually also correlates with a better understanding of the game, with better mental skills, right?
with better telethickness, with better telethickness and so on. But this is specifically with large numbers, because just as one can say that men's abilities to solve logical problems are higher than women's, and with large samples, this will be somewhat closer to the truth, right? But in particular, some local girl woman may solve logical problems significantly better than even a very clever guy. So there is a connection. But if we compare the specific expectations of two players, A and B, it is not necessarily going to be linear. Let me give an example. Player A has a win rate of 8 big blinds per 100, which is rather a good level, but not yet excellent, but leaning towards excellent. Let's say for high limits, it's a magnificent, magnificent result. And a nice red, everyone loves a nice red around 0 or above.
Player B plays 6 big blinds per 100 and a red under minus 10 big blinds per 100.
Player A fights for every ante, ignoring the ICM, not paying attention to the bubble proximity, often busts out before pay jumps or close to the pay zone, and sometimes self-destructs at the final table. And player B, on the contrary, is very ICM oriented, tanks on pre-bubbles, strictly monitors pay jumps, thinks about post-flop within the game with bubble factor, ICM, and so on. In the end, as I personally believe, player B will have a significantly higher expectation in terms of money, in terms of return on investment. And I would, for example, definitely prefer to take shares with player B at an equal rate. And then over 10 years that I have been teaching and over 15 years that I have been playing, I have encountered such examples many times. Here, of course, there are a number of caveats related to win rates at different blind levels, different depths and types of tournaments. And there will be different correlation in progressive knockout tournaments and well, in phase outs, because in progressive knockout tournaments they are much more win rate oriented, since, well, overall there is less bubble factor and less independent chip model. If we take again on average, I will just reveal the general idea, which is not to chase the win rate. Never chase the win rate specifically. Always try to play optimally, and what your red line will be and what win rate it will produce is a secondary question. If giving advice, then learn to always think within the framework of ICM and tournament formats. CHIPEV is just an abstract model and often has a very indirect overlap with real situations that arise in MTT. I'm done with the principles. Now let's talk about the game-related intricacies, which beginners and even many continuing players either forget or kind of know, but don't integrate, so to speak, into their poker thinking and their worldview. The very first thing that is a super foundation is that without a genuine interest in poker, poker will turn into hell for you and won't give you what you expect from it. Because now the path of a regular in MTT and in poker in general is a real sport. It's a true esports discipline and essentially a warrior's path where there's no place for the weak. As pompous as it may sound, it's true. We have a professional clinical psychologist working with us who recently defended a thesis on esports using poker as an example there and there. These conclusions are fully justified, and the correlation between these patterns, like blaming external factors, low productivity, this whining, all these things, introversion, like capriciousness, well, in general, the story about the soy people is a separate one. But this is not a poker anthropotype. First of all, it's very difficult for them and it doesn't turn out very well. So it's better to engage in some other activity where this heightened sensitivity is important. That's how I approach it. that there is no bad or good, but in the context of poker activity, it is definitely not very good. So if you are only somewhat interested, if you do not really love the game itself, then just remain an amateur. You don't need to become a professional. Your subconscious won't give you enough energy and attention for that. Next, if you don't know who the sucker at the table is, then that sucker is you. This is a famous quote. Now, I don't remember whose exactly, but there is a lot of truth in it, in the sense that you should play in the weakest lineups. Look for good rooms, good time slots when it's clear to you, like against whom you have an edge and in what exactly. Because the key to showing results in poker is your relative skill. You don't necessarily have to be the best player in the abstract sense. You just need to be the best player at your particular table. But which table you choose is your decision. Make a rough plan for the game at each table, from whom you will get value, with whom it is better not to clash too much. Well, these color tags are quite practical, so do not treat them as just marking offenders and abstract amateurs, because amateurs can be very different. Some are aggressive, some are passive, and there are different types of regulars. And specifically, the color tags should give you an understanding of your lineup. That is everything related to lineup-oriented thinking, so that you can just glance at the table and, in principle, the lineup in terms of characters, yes, is more or less clear to you. And as soon as you find yourself at a new table, start observing it and gradually taking notes. Especially if you have time and a few more tables. Sit in tournaments only from the start, especially in search. Rants are acceptable only if you play for fun, meaning you are a hobby player or an amateur, or you believe you have an incredible significant edge over the field in a specific tournament. That is preferably, this confidence should be backed by a double-digit overall win rate at these limits and a good win rate in short stacks. So if you are buying yourself, say, 30 blinds, then check your win rate at this depth, especially on big blinds, and make sure you are sitting down to actually win something here. And along with this, an excellent understanding of what is needed. But again, those who know this already know, but many just think that this is a completely free option. And whose top leagues are doing so much orientation there, so probably it's a great idea. I will let you in on a little secret. Many top leagues doing orienteering do it with a huge negative win rate, and a large number of MTT regulars by nature are just ordinary gamblers. Well, they kind of know how to play, but that doesn't change the fact that they are basically just gamblers. Well, you can call it something else, but we just call it what it is, so I won't try to find something else here, rake back again. Strive to get it, and don't give it to anyone. That is, if you choose some poker school or fund, and they tell you that they will split the rake back package or something like that, immediately to hell with it. First of all, they are very greedy people, and secondly, it's very unprofitable for you financially. Look, I've come up with this model. Let's move on to the next point. Don't think about the unfairness of variance. These are very harmful and destructive thoughts, because you cannot influence this in any case. And it's foolish to waste any of your mental energy on this and invest any emotions into it. In poker, never look for reasons for what happens outside of yourself. That is, do not blame the random number generator, the opponent, or anyone else. Full personal responsibility always lies with yourself. Everything depends on you.
If you don't like a certain room, just don't play there. Stop whining. This is what absolutely destroys you as a professional. And we largely choose what thoughts, what types of thoughts to think, and thoughts, they affect our state. Therefore, being eternally whining and depressed or cheerful and energetic is largely a matter of personal choice.